Please watch the video until the end. Chapter 1. The Highway After Midnight. The rain started like someone tearing a thin sheet of metal and throwing it against the world. I remember the way the wipers dragged across the windshield, stuttering as if they were trying to sweep the sky out of existence. I was driving west, nowhere in particular, when the highway emptied and the radio went dead. My name is Ethan Hale. I tell you this not for vanity but because names anchor stories to the bodies that tell them, and you deserve the human center of this chaos. Someone whose hands shook as he held a rusted doorknob and tried to stop the world from bleeding through. It began with a stopped semi-truck, its cargo spilled across the asphalt like a sacrificial altar. Cages torn open, the animals silent and unrecognizable, their eyes reflecting the rain like distant moons. And then I saw her, a woman slumped beside the guardrail, her coat soaked, her face as pale as the sky, and a rounded belly beneath her jacket that defied the ruin around her. I pulled over because you always pull over for someone who looks like they might not make it through the night. She didn't speak at first. When she finally opened her mouth, it was to whisper a name I didn't catch, like a prayer in a language half remembered. She placed her hand on the side of her stomach, and the tremor there made the hairs on my arm rise. Behind her, where the trees leaned like mourners, something moved with too much purpose to be an animal. Chapter 2. The Last Light Motel. The motel was a rectangle of sodium lights and peeling paint, a place that promised neither comfort nor continuity. The neon sign flickered last light, like an apology. Inside, the office smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. An old man with cataracts took one look at the woman and handed me a key without asking questions. Out beyond the bay window, the world narrowed into road and rain, and the impossible hush that settles when too many people stop speaking. We were a handful, the motel owner named Marcus, a young couple arguing in whispers in the adjacent room, a trucker who lived on peppermints and bad country songs, and Ida, the woman with the child inside her, who said her name like it was a shield. She was not young and not old, just a woman with a small scar at the corner of her mouth that twitched when she smiled. That night she sat beneath the humming fluorescent light and told us, simply, "He won't let them take it." I laughed once, a brittle, useless sound. "Who is he?" I asked. Ida looked at me like she recognized an old fear. "Not him," she said. "Not one of us." Chapter 3. The Watcher Who Failed. He arrived after midnight, stepping out of the rain with a coat that didn't quite drape like any coat should. His eyes were the wrong color for any person, a flat metallic brown that swallowed light. He called himself Oral. He said he had been doing the watching for longer than any of the calendars had hands, and that the world was a ledger, and sometimes you had to balance it. He spoke with a formal cadence, like a man reading a confession aloud. He told us the sky had spoken in a voice made of static and frost. Orders came down, an erasure, a pruning. The instruments of judgment, he said, were on their way. But he had left his post, Oral admitted, when he saw Ida. When he saw the life within her, something he could no longer name, pity, perhaps, or a rotten strand of mercy, pulled him from his ranks. He knelt to inspect her belly like a child learning the name of an animal. I wanted to laugh and then my lungs seized because the rational part of my brain had nowhere left to hide. "Why protect a single life?" asked Marcus, setting down a tray like a weapon. "If the orders are what you say, we're just stalling." Oral's answer was simple. "Some things must be allowed to persist," he said, "even against orders." Chapter 4. The Siege. The first knock came like a drumbeat signaling the end. They were not men. They came in pairs, silhouettes that moved with the jerking certainty of puppets. Their mouths were too wide when they opened them, and their breaths smelled of cold wire. They carried blades that unfolded like wings, white and humming. The light they cast made blood look like glass. We barricaded the door with beds and brass lamps and whatever superstition we could muster. The trucker tried to drive his rig through the front windows at one point, his face gone rubbery with fear. But the creature outside stepped aside as if to let the truck pass, then turned and laughed without sound and entered through the hole it had made. The night filled with the kind of sound I will never forget, the soft tearing of flesh, the percussion of boots on linoleum, the low, metallic cry of an engine no longer connected to anything living. Oral fought with a tenderness that stunned me. He moved differently from any human, not because of the speed but because of the unbearable precision. Where a human strikes with rage, he struck with purpose. He killed without hate. He tore the wings from their bodies and fed them to the furnace like a butcher feeding coals. Yet every time he struck, he seemed to take a piece of himself with the blow, like a candle burning backward. When Marcus tried to leave, thinking to find help, something took him outside and his scream folded into the rain. When the trucker turned and found his radio playing nursery songs at full volume, his eyes rolled into his head and his hands clawed at the air until the room smelled of copper. The couple in the next room stopped whispering and started reciting scripture they didn't know. I learned then that the siege was not just physical. It was a war for the shape of our minds. Chapter 5, The Choice. Ida's labor came sudden as thunder. We had no doctor, only Oral with his hands that could mend and maim with the same motion. He refused to step outside the line of fire. "If I leave," he said, "the orders will come true." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw a memory in his eyes, fields of white, the sound of pages, the soft smell of cedar, and I understood that he had once been closer to what passed for heaven than any of us deserved. The motel became something like a cathedral for the desperate. We lit candles, not because they would help against steel and wing, but because light is a habit that keeps souls from slipping. Ida's cries were a drum of hope and terror. The attackers came in waves, their faces sometimes human at the edge of their masks, then slipping into something conjured from prayer and pain. Bodies fell, and each death was a punctuation in the sentence of that night. At one point I found a blade and held it like a promise. There is a moment in every fight where your hands decide you are no longer a witness. I moved through the rooms with the awkward certainty of someone born to fear, and I did things I cannot clean from my memory. I killed. I watched friends die with their mouths forming the names of children and regrets. Oral caught my wrist with fingers that burned like fresh iron and said, "Do not carry this as shame. Carry it as proof that you were willing." When Ida's breath stilled and then came back like a bell under water, we all leaned in. The child arrived with a shriek and a wet, terrible sound that seemed to push back the world by an inch. For a heartbeat, the air forgot to be heavy. Chapter 6, The Afterlight. We thought that birth would be an amulet. We thought that a fragile cry could stand against what the firmament had unthreaded. For a few breathless minutes it seemed so. Oral laughed, a real sound, like ice cracking, and the creatures outside hesitated as if they could not comprehend the theft. But the sky is patient. It makes long calculations, and its justice is slow. In the gray before dawn, we were given a choice by a messenger whose face had been carved smooth by light. "Return the child," it intoned, voice like 1,000 pages turning. "Or be unmade." Oral stepped forward and did something that I could never have predicted. He knelt and took the child's small hand in his enormous palm and whispered words that were not meant for mortal ears. He placed the hand against his chest where his coat lay open, and for a moment his skin flamed like a dying star. He could have handed the infant over. He could have obeyed orders and walked away with clean wings. But he did not. He lifted the child and held it to Ida's chest as if he were the one requesting a mercy rather than denying one. The messenger's light became a blade. It cut through the motel like a promise of winter. Oral walked into it without flinching. He did not scream. He sang, or I thought he sang. The light took him and left a smell like ozone and old prayers. When it was over, there was nothing where he had stood but a puddle of clothes and a single feather blackened at the edges. The kind of feather that is rumor and ash. We buried what remained of those we loved in the motel's back lot beneath a sky that didn't know how to weep. Ida named the child Hope because names are stubborn things, and because in the dark we will clutch at any irony we can find. Days later, when the sun came back in small, exhausted pieces, we left the motel like survivors of a shipwreck, carrying our grief like luggage. I do not know where Ida went or whether hope grew into the thing Oral had hoped for. Sometimes at night I wake to a sound like distant wings folding, and I think of the hand Oral pressed to his chest, of the light that found him, and of the way he chose a single life over a ledger. The world continued with its soft, indifferent clocks. The sky, if it ever sighed, did so in a language I cannot translate. But there is one thing I will tell you plainly. The last time I saw the feather, it had a small smear of red at the tip. Perhaps it was ours. Perhaps it was Oral's. Or perhaps, in a universe that remembers everything it has lost, there are debts that must always be paid. And sometimes, when the night is very still, I hear a child's laugh that isn't quite human. It sits at the edge of the world like a promise and a threat both, and I find my hands going to the places scars have made. We survived that night, some of us. Some of us did not. The rest of us learned to live inside the memory of a light that burned too bright to be anything but a warning. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give the video a like, leave a comment, and share the video.